thank you all for hanging around and participating in this discussion. It's really important discussion. I think after a few days of kind of sitting on your tail, it gets a little more difficult, I know, but really appreciate you hanging out and as you complete your meal, if you'd like to come up, we'd like to get everybody fairly closely associated with the stage if we could. It makes conversations go a little better, but again, thank you all. Been a great couple of days here and really have appreciated what I continue to learn with my association with this group. Been engaged with them now for the last couple of years and jump on the quarterly calls when we have those as I'm able to. But what really stands out to me about what's going on with this group is that we're talking to one another. And the NGOs are talking to each other. They're talking to landowners. Landowners are talking to us. What you really start to pick up on is, when I go back to the points early in my career where, I thought to myself, why is it we have some difficulty connecting with our landowners? And I think to some extent, it was a lack of understanding and probably, if I dare say, a lack of appreciation of what it is they did, what it is they do on a daily basis. They're caring for the land. What this group does is it provides perspective to those of us that work in agencies and for NGOs and we're here to help. But sometimes it's hard to help if you don't really know what the best thing to do is. And, so the collaboration, the partnerships that have evolved from this group over time and through South Dakota Grasslands Coalition as well, another very important group and partner in this initiative, have been very provocative and I think really enabled and promoted the relationship building that is so important. And it's all in collaboration for something we love and need, and that is grasslands and grassland conservation. So thank you all for being here. We're just going to talk a little bit about a bit of background and Mark Staples have put together a few slides for me and see if I can click with the work. In terms of kind of where we've come from, back in 2012, there was a feasibility study here, right, specific for South Dakota, where they looked at the potential for conservation finance for such a heritage program as we're going to be talking about today. And thankfully, we're going to have actually a total of 5 speakers today and this year. There's success stories and the challenges that they faced and looking for opportunities to grow financing for conservation purposes. We have 4 from our neighboring states and 1 right here in good old South Dakota. BJ Smith is going to be joining us to talk about his efforts as a state senator in getting past the bill that created the habitat change. So during that study, the Trust for Public Land was conducted by them. They looked at potential revenue streams that already existed in our state. They looked at opportunity to leverage some benefits to local communities. And of course, in the last couple of days, you've really seen how not only do we see benefits for the ranchers themselves from some of these programs, but we see opportunities and growth in our communities that are just as much in trouble as across our state. So the study looked at recommending increases in funding for parks of land and water conservation. They suggested some next steps that included an assessment of conservation needs and associated costs, as well as a public opinion survey. So the public opinion survey is what I want to really kind of focus on as some preliminary information, but so previous exploration funding needs looked at the pool of voters from South Dakota, and they conducted a poll where they they asked 400 registered voters various questions with regard to this topic. That effort resulted in some data, and then we'll share that with you. But there certainly continues to be pretty favorable support for this type of a program. When you look at, for example, the polling revealed that 79% of the public were willing to pay more in taxes and fees to the tune of at least $20 per year more for protecting drinking water, providing recreation opportunities, etc. Some of the issues that ranked extremely important or very important by polling respondents: protecting water resources and drinking water. 80% of the respondents felt that was extremely important or very important. Protecting unique natural areas like the Black Hills. 69% of the people felt that was extremely important or very important. Conserving working farms and ranches, 66%, and protecting fish and wildlife, 58%. So just a little background on kind of where we are and the landscape as it was back in 2013. We also have some more recent polling that was conducted by the South Dakota Grasslands Coalition and working with the Selva Company. They polled 505 registered voters in our state back in 2023. And again, found pretty broad bipartisan support for the development of such a fund. And some of the recent polling, for example, was that South Dakota voters still believe that land and water conservation is extremely important. 93% believe that it's important that government action be taken to protect and assure safe and clean drinking water. 80% agree that the testing practices and creating government agencies and programs and incentives to address grassland management is a good idea. And then 80% of those polled found it personally important that governments take actions to support soil quality on farms and ranches throughout the state. So where have we come in the last few years in terms of this overall effort? Well, as I described to Mark and Laura, about the same time this finance study was undertaken here in South Dakota, Game Fish and Parks worked with the South Dakota Governor's Office and Governor Dugard at the time to host a pheasant habitat summit. And that was back in 2013. So complementary to some of these investigations that were going on with this potential for development of a heritage fund was a state effort through the governor's office to look at ways that we can grow and see more pheasant habitat on the landscape. Certainly there are ongoing federal efforts that are complementary to some of the things that we're going on in the state and continue to go on in the state today. Like farm bills, vitally important, obviously. New legislation such as Recovering America's Wildlife Act. But there has been some progress, and part of that progress has been a direct result of that pheasant habitat summit. Governor Dugard then, on the heels of that summit, put together a pheasant habitat working group. That working group developed a report and some findings, one of which was that the state should consider looking into the development of a conservation or heritage conservation fund. But then the work group itself began to evolve and develop, and eventually we saw the creation of the second Federal Habitat Fund in 2019. So we do have a fund that's been created focused on habitat. We also saw in 2020, thanks to the efforts of Senator B.J. Smith, the development of Habitat Camp Fund and the requirement for all hunters in South Dakota, almost all hunters in South Dakota, to purchase a habitat stamp along with all our non-resident hunters that come and visit South Dakota. So that was an important step forward, and that fund is now, I think, providing about $5.5 million a year in annual revenue to get things done on the ground. And looking around the crowd here, I see a lot of our own game and fish faces, but we also have lots of partners that we share those funds with and collaborate on various projects. So between Second Century Habitat Fund, getting work done on the landscape, private land, habitat stamp funds that are also complementary. And then just this past year in 2024, there was a habitat conservation specialty license plate that was developed that also raises some money. I'm not exactly sure the annual amount for those license plates. I think we're probably still learning as we go with the exact funding is going to be. But anyway, just by way of sharing information, these are some things that are ongoing. So nonetheless, the need for additional conservation funding is going to persist. And so we're happy to be here and host some of the speakers to tell us about the success stories and challenges that they face with regard to habitat funds, conservation funds, outdoor heritage funds that were developed in their home state. So first off, I'm going to ask BJ Smith. BJ and I go back a long ways, so all the way back to college. Maybe a year older than me, graduated in 78. I graduated in 79, but known BJ for a long time. He worked in the aerospace industry after he graduated South Dakota State, and he later returned to SDSU and worked in various capacities. But served as their executive director of the Alumni Association for quite a long time too. BJ is a prolific public speaker. He's a great author. He wrote a book, best-selling book called The Richest Man in Town. And just as a warning, if you are interested in purchasing the book, The Richest Man in Town, and I would encourage you to do so. It's a great book. I would also purchase a box of Kleenex to have handy. It is one of those reads that you can't put it down once you start. And unbeknownst to you, you're about to learn some really important life lessons through a story told by BJ Smith. So with that, I'm going to ask BJ to come up, and as the state senator, he developed the Habitat Fund, and BJ is going to tell us about the trials and tribulations of that effort. Thank you, BJ.
As Henry VIII told his second wife, "Don't worry, I won't keep you for long." I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I promised Laura and the group that I will adhere to the time frame because I understand there are a lot of things ahead of you. The first time I ran for the legislature, oh, by the way, I am a recovering legislator. Very difficult to get it out of your system. But it was 2018, and before I went to Pierre, I met with a man by the name of Spencer Vaugh, who is a biologist, a game biologist, and lives in Brookings. And he told me his favorite place to hunt pheasants was western Minnesota. I couldn't believe it. But that state in 2008 passed the referendum, and an incredible amount of money is going to habitat production. Since 2009, 1.8 billion, according to the records that I've seen. You can buy a lot of stuff with $1.8 billion. And if you drive through western Minnesota now, it's unbelievable how many birds you see. So fast forward, in January of 2019, I was in the legislature. In the second week of March, it's our last day of the Senate, last day of the legislature. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and this very loud state senator is absolutely going after Governor Nome because she wants to put $1 million into the Second Century Habitat Fund. And I couldn't believe it. Here it is 1 o'clock in the morning. He's fighting this fight that he's going to lose. And he referred to pheasants as illegal aliens. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, So I contacted a member of the LRC, the Legislative Research Council, and I said, hey, tell me how many states that we share a border with have a habitat stamp? I'd like to know. And an hour later, she came back and she said, they all have habitat stamps, we're the only one that doesn't. I couldn't believe it. Why? And so when I was driving back to Brookings, by the way, we had to get off the road by 4 o'clock that morning because the highway patrol was going to shut it down because of a blizzard. And on the way back, I started thinking about habitat stamp, and I also thought, you know what I'm going to do when I get back to Brookings? I'm going to go buy a dozen thank you cards, and I'm going to send personal messages, notes to my favorite senators, and tell them exactly why I like them. And so the next day, I bought a dozen cards, went home, and I wrote my favorite senators. And on the way to the post office, I thought, you idiot. You have 34 colleagues. You're going to need all of them. So I went right back past the post office, bought 24 more cards, went home and wrote personal notes to each of these colleagues and thanked them. 2 weeks later, we have veto night where the Senate or the legislature comes back and you consider a veto by the governor. And I couldn't believe it. Practically every senator stopped at my desk, and none had ever stopped at my desk. And they told me the reason why was because of that card that they received. And Emmett talked about a little bit ago, this whole thing in life is built on relationships, and we don't build relationships on texts, tweets, Facebook posts, and emails. We do it the old-fashioned way. We sit down and we talk to someone face to face. Well, so during the summer of 2019, I worked with the LRC, we fashioned a bill, but I also worked with a graphic designer and put together 2 colorful publications to demonstrate the effectiveness of a habitat stamp program. And in September, I sent out the first one to 104 colleagues, obviously 70 in the House, 34, including me, 35 in the Senate. And I sent out personal notes in each one. On the opener of pheasant season in 2019, I sent out the second one to start the conversation in earnest. And then one of the smartest things I did was I started contacting the heads of wildlife groups in the state. That legislation would not pass without their support because they were going to be the ones paying for it. And so I started my conversations and I went to the hometowns of a lot of these senators that I had just served a session with. And I met them in cafes and in bars and whatever. Fast forward to January 2020, the bill is introduced. Got Herman Otten, then a representative from T, South Dakota to carry it on the House side. But I committed myself every day for 1 hour to be on this House side, talking to at least 2 state representatives about this bill. I didn't want to leave any stone unturned. Full focus. And the wildlife groups came. And late February, early March, the Senate passed the bill 30-4, which is really amazing because it's a tax. And people in South Dakota don't get excited about taxes. It went over the House side and it passed 50-14. And went on to the governor's office. We didn't know what the governor was going to do. Besides that, we were in the middle of COVID, the beginning of COVID. And I didn't know, couldn't get to the governor to find out what she was thinking because she had campaigned on a promise, no new taxes while I'm gone. But she signed it in the darkness. And I had asked, because you normally get your picture taken with the governor signing a piece of legislation, there was no picture. But they did send me the pen. Yeah. So that's my consolation prize off that deal. I'll tell you what I'm proud of, because I really didn't know going forward how large this could be. Emmett talked about it. It went into effect the 1st of July of the year 2020. Today it's raised $29,628,305. I'm amazed by it. 18 million goes for terrestrial. 12 million goes for aquatic. Almost 2/3 of that amount is paid by out-of-state people, by the way. They pay $25, people South Dakota pay $10. And as far as I look at this, it was always an insurance policy to me. An insurance policy about the future. And you know this better than I do because you're people of the prairie. Outside the ringneck pheasant and the Hungarian partridge, those critters were here a lot longer than we ever got here. And we're gonna take care of them. And access, in fact, I'll break this down for just a moment. On the grasslands, aquatic, the pollinator planting, food plots, the woody habitat planting, CREP payments, access, walk-in areas. It's unbelievable how that program has expanded. 1,400 different projects. On the aquatic side, dam repair, that's DAM repair. Habitat structures, dredging, docks and piers, aquatic access, and leases. I said it a little bit ago. There are so many people who get credit for the habitat stamp program. The wildlife groups, the legislators who went to bat, citizens who came and testified. This is not a one-person deal. A lot of people showed up to support it. And why they showed up is because there weren't tweets, there weren't texts, there weren't Facebook postings. We had old-fashioned conversations, relationship building. And that's where it's at, face to face, like they did in the good old days. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, South Dakotans, for inviting me to come speak to you about the origin of the Nebraska Environmental Trust. It's a long and sordid story in some ways, but it has been successful. There, as was mentioned, it started in 1992. Money started coming for various projects the next year. But it really all started when Ben Nelson, Democrat, was elected governor in 1990. One of his campaign promises was to support a Nebraska lottery. And of course, that had to go through the legislature. And as you all know, we have one house in Nebraska, and it's nonpartisan, at least that's the way it is on the ballot. But over the years, till almost now, there have been almost $500 million given to about 2,600 projects, including habitat, surface and groundwater, waste management and recycling, air quality and soil management projects. And it's, of course, our goal, the goal of the trust, is to conserve, enhance, and restore the natural and physical and biological environment in Nebraska. So the trust is interlocked with the lottery, but it all didn't happen at the same time. When the governor talked about wanting to support the lottery, the Nature Conservancy, a Nebraska chapter of which I worked, commissioned a poll that determined an overwhelming number of Nebraskans would support a mechanism to help protect the environment of the state. And they would support paying for that with a lottery and an increase in the tax on cigarettes. So the poll results were shared with the governor and key lawmakers. So in 1991, the legislature approved a constitutional amendment to be put on the ballot to be ratified in 1992 during the general election. A law in 1991 passed approximately at the same time, dedicated 49.5% of the proceeds to an education innovation fund, 1% of the proceeds to a gambler's assistance fund, and 49.5% to be, quote, distributed at the direction of the legislature. And so in the 1992 session of the legislature, that money was up for grabs. And of course, everybody wanted it. It was estimated that maybe there would be $25 to $30 million available every year. So But over the interim between the 91 and 92 sessions, a group of us got together and came up with basically the format of an environmental trust to be funded by that undesignated half of the lottery. And so, that would be half of that undesignated fund. The other half is going to go to mitigate local landfill sites. And of course, a lot of town dumps all over Nebraska need to be cleaned up, and that money would do that. So the dollars would revert to the trust to do that. So 2 cents of a 10-cent tax increase on a pack of cigarettes would go to the trust. And the remaining 8 cents would go for prisons, higher ed, and state building renovation. So the bill, as introduced, went to the Revenue Committee. And as we say, you don't want to see how sausage or legislation is made. So when the bill came out of the Revenue Committee, the Environmental Trust still had its share of the lottery money, but the tobacco lobby had convinced the committee that 5 cents instead of 10 cents was a fair increase in cigarette tax. So there was a whole group of new lobbyists. As I mentioned, we had people lobbying for better prisons, higher ed, state building renovations, colleges, private colleges. So that was all going on during the 92 session of the legislature. So when the bill came out of the committee, the trust had been allocated just 1 cent of the tax instead of 2, but its initial share of the lottery dollars remained at 25%. Remember, the other 25% was for cleaning up the town dumps, and the other half went to education. So there was a coalition formed of environmental groups, conservation groups, and people who wanted to see and to make sure that the Environmental Trust got its share of the money. So, but when and I was there lobbying on behalf of the Nature Conservancy. So the bill, when the bill came out, as I mentioned, a lot of it had been cut back, particularly the part taking tax on cigarettes. So as I indicated, never underestimate the power of the tobacco lobby, at least back in the 90s. I think their power has subsided some now. But anyway, it was the short session of the legislature, which was in Nebraska 60 days. So there wasn't a whole lot of time to consider this. So when the bill came out, the tobacco lobby played for time. They would just stall and then the whole thing would go away. So there'd be money coming from the tobacco lobby or the lottery or anything else. And that half share of the lottery money would be still up for grabs during the next session. We didn't want that because we didn't know what was going to happen. So everything in the next year would have to be reintroduced again. And who knows who would jump in there and want that in 93. So believing that that bill was doomed because it looked like it wasn't going to be able to go anywhere. I approached a senator who had sponsored the town dump cleanup bill and told him that, there's money in there for you, for your bill. His bill had no money, but it had been advanced and it was on the floor of the legislature. So I said, you could use the lottery money for a few early years until the Environmental Trust gained full control of the 50% of the lottery funds. He agreed. His bill with the creation of the Environmental Trust and funded by the lottery money attached as amendment was passed on the final day of the session. Well, as sometimes happened, those of you who are legislators there who spend time at the legislature, sometimes things get through and people don't even know what's happened. So if you noticed, the original bill went up in smoke. Basically, the tobacco lobby had killed it, but the Environmental Trust Authorization Bill had been put on the senator's dump cleanup or landfill cleanup bill, and it passed right at the end of the session. So The governor, who was very supportive, obviously, of the Environmental Trust, signed it. And so there it was. And so now we needed to pass in the 92 general election the constitutional amendment to create the state lottery, which was going to fund it. So we called our committee, and I managed the committee to get this through to the people, take it to the people, to vote the lottery into existence. We called our committee Friends of Education and the Environment, tying the lottery as closely as we could to the Environmental Trust and to the education part of it. We had a good support from the beginning. Obviously, the governor was the honorary chairman of our committee. We had a noted University of Nebraska wildlife specialist as a co-chair, and the head of the teachers union, the State Education Association, as the other co-chair. So we had a pretty powerful group going through this. So I have to mention that every daily newspaper in the state opposed this. Two former governors opposed this. Coach Tom Osborne, you all know Tom Osborne, he opposed it. But in the end, after a long campaign and pointing out that states around Nebraska had a lottery, and Iowa did, for example, have a lottery already, and people were leaving Omaha, going over and buying lottery tickets in Iowa all the time, and none of that money was coming back to Nebraska. So we ran our campaign. We got 62% of the vote. So we had then all set up. We had the lottery to fund the Nebraska Environmental Trust. Now, the structure of the trust was such, and it was set out in legislation at that time, there would be a trust board of state agency heads, agriculture, game and parks, et cetera, and then civilians who had some background in finance, conservation, whatever. And I think there's still a 14-member conservation environmental trust board. So what happens and how this process works is that individuals, but mainly groups, conservation organizations, and we have NRDs, natural resource districts in Nebraska that have certain areas based on basically river basins. They could apply for money for projects, as I mentioned, various projects. And I don't know if you can hear that bird here. I'm sitting in the background I have here is I'm in Arizona, and I have a window open, and you can hear a bird there. I mean, maybe that lends a little bit to the atmosphere. But in any case, what you would apply to and there are forms sent out to the Nebraska Environmental Trust, and those projects would be submitted, and then they would be evaluated by experts in whatever field. Remember, we had a wide range of areas where projects would work on. And they'd be evaluated and ranked, and then a grants committee would take a look at those and recommend it to the full board, the grants committee made up of the trust board. And they would be ranked in order, and then money would be distributed to them. Initially, we had real good board members appointed by Governor Nelson and subsequent Republican governors, board members who really cared about conservation in Nebraska and who cared. However, when you see a pot of money sitting there, $20, $30 million, the legislature sometimes is sitting there wringing its hand. In 2003, there was a shortage of general funds. And so there was legislation introduced to grab several $1 million out of the trust fund, just appropriated it and took it. So as a result of that, a group of supporters of the trust fund had the legislature introduce and pass a constitutional amendment for the ballot to be on the 2004 general election ballot to basically put the whole process in the state constitution. So the legislature couldn't do that again. And so that passed with, I think it's about 55% of the vote in 2004. they had to add, as part of the compromise, the state fair in Nebraska was going under, couldn't support itself. So 10% of that money, then as part of that constitutional amendment, went and is still going to keep the state fair afloat. And it was moved from Lincoln, the capital, to Grand Island, which is out in the middle of the state. And it seems to be doing okay with support now of the lottery money. So that worked for a while. And then we had a succession of governors who appointed maybe not so conservation-minded board members. And they weren't particularly supportive of, and I'm not going to name names, of the mission. So we had some more attempts to then take, even though it was in the Constitution, take money out of the trust by passing legislation, which changed some of the mechanics of getting money. So before you had to compete and all, and so they just appropriated money. It changed the law and appropriated money out. So that's why the organization that I belong to and some former state legislators and other conservation former trust board members formed Friends of the Nebraska Environmental Trust to try to save it. So we have worked on that. We've tried to convince the legislature not to steal too much money, or take, I should say, take too much money to help balance the general fund budget. However, last 2 years that has happened. So as a result, we are now working on a constitutional amendment to put in the Constitution the mechanics of getting money out of the trust fund, basically. So that would solidify and help keep money there so that the legislature could not come in, change the law, and take money out of the normal process, which of course is a competitive process. So that's what's just came out of the Natural Resources Committee of the legislature. And it will be going to the floor. Of course, again, this is election year, so it's the short session of the legislature. And so there we are. It is now on the floor. Hopefully it will be taken up. The chair of the Natural Resources Committee in the legislature has made it his priority bill. We have priority bills that are taken up by the speaker in that order, and they're given priority over other bills. So that's basically where we are right now. We're working to try to keep the Nebraska Environmental Trust dedicated to its mission, keep it viable with money there, lottery money there. The amount of money has gone down. We have now casino gambling in Nebraska, and that's taken a little bit of money away, but we still get as much as $20 million for projects and in the trust fund. So where we are right now, half the about 44.5% goes to education, to the Department of Education for various education projects, 44.5% to the Environmental Trust, and there's some money for gamblers assistance, and then 10% goes to the state fair. And that's in the Constitution. What we're trying to do now is to put in the Constitution the ability of the trust to keep its money and not let the legislature take it out for purposes that are not consistent with how and what the trust was formed for. So that's kind of the long story. I think we're fairly confident we can get this constitutional amendment to the people. If legislature passes it, it will go to the ballot in November, and then we will have some more work to do to convince people that this is what needs to be done. So that's the end of my spiel of the sordid and complicated role of creating the Nebraska Environmental Trust. But we've been in existence. The trust has been in existence. Started giving out money in 1993. There have been projects in all 93 Nebraska counties, and as I mentioned, it's close to $500 million has been allocated for various habitat, water resource, landfill cleanup, obviously, and other water resources all over Platte River, Niobrara River, Lincoln area, Omaha area, all over the state. There have been applications for projects, good applications, and I think the money has been well spent. We just need to keep it, and that's what we're trying to do with this constitutional amendment that's now on the floor of the Nebraska legislature. So that's all I have, and I'll be happy to answer any questions when the Q&A time comes, I think after the other people present. So I'll sign off. I'll take my big face off the screen and let others talk. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Randy. Our second speaker is someone I'm familiar with. I've known Keith Trigo for quite a number of years. He and I worked, he worked the North Dakota side, I worked the South Dakota side, and Keith served as deputy director for North Dakota Game and Fish for quite a few years. And about the time that I came in to the assistant wildlife director position, so we got to be bureaucrats together, I guess. Keith has a MS degree in wildlife management from North Dakota State. His work and experience includes fish and wildlife management, planning, law enforcement administration, public policy work at state, regional, and national levels, and would often run into Keith at some of the national meetings, and we'd sit in on committees together and drink a beer late and talk about it. Yeah, it's been great to have Keith just across the border. Keith now has been an executive director for North Dakota Natural Resources Trust since 1998. And he's going to speak to us about his experience in developing that trust and the pitfalls and challenges. And so Keith, welcome.
Then just make sure you're close to the microphone since you're taller and yes, just make sure.
Working. How about that? Oh, good. Okay. All right. So first of all, thanks for the invitation to be here. This is an awesome conference. Got to go away from these feeling inspired for all the reasons everybody's mentioned. Folks of like mind getting together, talking about protecting natural resources. So I'll tell you the story about our Outdoor Heritage Fund. We do have a statutory Outdoor Heritage Fund. But I'm going to sandwich that story in between two initiated measures because that's how we actually began our work. So I know polling's been done. Emmett mentioned it in South Dakota to look at public attitudes. We started back in 2010 with our first official polling, and of course did several subsequent polls along the way. We drafted what at that time was called the Clean Water, Lands, and Outdoor Heritage Amendment, and it was actually a amendment that would have altered the state constitution in favor of conservation practices. We did our signature gathering, and the plan was to go to the 2012 general election ballot. So on Labor Day of weekend of 2012, I was vacationing with my family at a nice little park in southeast North Dakota. My phone rang. Well, kind of odd. And Patrice, the gal that was coordinating some of this for us, was on the other end, and she said, "Where are you?" Well, I'm at Fort Ransom Park, enjoying myself. And she said, "You should go find a place and sit down. I need to talk to you." I'm like, "Ooh, that doesn't sound good." So what Patrice relayed was that the firm that we had hired to do our signature gathering had, and this is a great football story. People mentioned football rivalries yesterday. She'd hired some NDSU football players to help gather signatures. Well, some of them decided that they were a little low on energy, so they just sat in their dorm rooms and falsified signatures, which got picked up when they checked the ballots. And we didn't have enough signatures, so we didn't have an initiated measure. So what that precipitated was some discussions, and basically, this was the overview that we had for that clean water initiated measure. Big picture, ag money, wildlife money, parks, water quality, probably $100 million plus is what we calculated it would generate. So based on our initiated measure, our governor and several legislators and some other folks who were opposed to this effort, well, talk a little bit more about it as we go along here, decided that if they proposed a statutory approach, that would derail our initiated measure. So we, in the fall of 2012, we sat with a variety of people, and I'll talk a little more about that later. I'm going to come back to this because this is actually the fund that we have. But we drafted a statute that went to the 2013 legislative session and passed. But it was partly designed to offset further initiated measures. So our sponsoring group, after lots of thought, maybe bad decisions, but our decisions nonetheless, decided we were going to continue, make a second effort at an initiated measure for a much larger amount. So we actually rewrote the work, renamed it Clean Water, Wildlife and Parks Trust Fund. It was actually much better written than the first one. Gathered our signatures, got it on the ballot for the 2014 general election. Would have generated 100 million plus. It was opposed by ag, energy, and business, and I'll talk more about that. And I should say that these funds were, we did have a source of funding, which I know is always a question, where's the funds come from? We happen to have a little oil in North Dakota, so our approach was to use a small portion, and I'll touch on that here in a minute, of the oil taxes. So it was not new taxes, it was money that the state was already collecting, wouldn't have cost the petroleum industry any more money. But at the last minute, the American Petroleum Institute came into the state and spent a lot of money opposing our initiated measure. One of the things they used was a technique called push polling, which some of you probably know. Basically, it's when you pose as a legitimate polling firm and you call people and you say things like, so if you knew that Measure 5, which was our measure, would take money away from the public school system, would you think that was a good idea? If you knew that Measure 5 was designed to gather millions of dollars to buy land away from farmers and ranchers, would you think that was a good idea? They called lots of folks in the state, I think some houses more than once, and the final vote was, we lost by an 80-20 margin, which was basically the reverse of the polling that we had. I mean, we showed, as you showed in your polling numbers for South Dakota, we had 70 to 80% support all the way along, but that was pre-messaging, pre-influencing of this type. So our measure didn't go very well. So when we did the statute, so back to we'll focus on the Outdoor Heritage Fund because that is what we have. This was the group that put together the statutory language. So you can see we have ag groups, we have energy groups, we have business, and way on the bottom, you've got conservation. And the reason I mentioned ducks and the trust is that Steve Adair, who was the Great Plains office manager at that time for Ducks Unlimited, some of you here know him, I'm sure, and myself were tasked with sitting with these folks week after week and drafting the legislation. So we did that. It was passed during the 2013 session, and the funding is 8% of the first 1% of our oil and gas production tax. So that's what it looks like. Just concentrate on the upper left-hand corner there. This is a process our legislature uses. They call it buckets. They fill and overflow and stream down, but it's 0.8%. The statute says it allows up to 20 million a year, 40 million a biennial, because we have a biennial legislative session. It's essentially been artificially capped at 7.5 per year and 15 per biennium all the way through. So I still hear people often refer to the 20 and 40. It's never been a 20 and 40. So this is the governance approach. There's 12 board members, 4 ag. You can read the numbers there. 4 from conservation at large. The groups other than conservation are all named. And what I mean by that is, says 1 from the Farm Bureau, 1 from the Farmers Union, 1 from the grain growers, that sort of thing. They're all designated. We argued against that unsuccessfully. The conservation members originally were named, and then subsequently during legislative sessions, they were unnamed. So they're all at large, and it works fine. But so that board hears applications, makes decisions, and then they make a set of recommendations that go to our industrial commission, which is the governor, attorney general, and ag commissioner. They technically make the final decision, but as you expect, it's kind of a rubber stamp. Generally, they just go ahead and fund whatever that group designates. There's 4 directives, public access, which we've talked about a lot. Kevin talked about that yesterday. We all know that's extremely important. Things that would enhance farming and ranching, fish and wildlife habitat, and then parks and rec. So each application has to have 1 or more of those focus points. The funds can't be used for these things, some pretty obvious things, lobbying, litigation, and interfere with energy production, which is kind of a given. No land acquisition and no contracts longer than 20 years, which we also, on the conservation side, tried to convince folks that we should have a bit more flexibility, but we were totally unsuccessful. So those are the restrictions. So to date, they funded, this is 260. I think this is a graph we pulled from the Industrial Commission staff. I think it's actually a little bit more than that. And the total amount spent so far is probably about 105 million on the whole array of projects, some parks and rec, but lots of good conservation projects. So here's a few examples of the kinds of projects that, and these are some that our trust has been involved in. We've done several, what we call Bakken grants. The Bakken landscape is the oil and gas producing area in the western part of the state. We have 18 counties that they consider the oil and gas producing counties. So we've done 3 iterations of that grant. We're going to submit our 4th one this spring. We've impacted almost 126,000 acres and a bit over $7 million. So lots of grassland work there, grazing systems, grass seeding, very well received. Another one that's been really successful is a working grassland partnership, which is focused on expiring CRP acres. So we get to people who have contracts in the last year and try and convince them to keep that land in grass. And we offer fencing, water development. And we're in our 7th iteration of that grant. I mean, it's the same grant. The demand is through the roof. Impacted over 106,000 acres and spent over $6 million on that type of work. This is kind of the big idea of the last one that was funded, and you may have read something about this. Our current governor is a very avid sportsman. He is providing a lot of support for outdoor recreation, and so the Game and Fish Department, along with a variety of partners, presented this Legacy Soil Health and Habitat Program, which was also funded by the Outdoor Heritage process. This is a picture during dedication that we had here about 3 or 4 weeks ago with, some of you will recognize folks. That's me standing between the governor and the ag commissioner. Even our ag commissioner thought this was a really good idea, which was nice. But you got folks there from Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, Wildlife Federation. So the Outdoor Heritage put $4.3 million into this. The total project is worth about 6.5. Each of these requires some match. So this is a really big idea. But again, if you think back to our original ballot measures that we proposed, I mean, we're talking 100+ million. My memory serves me correct, when we had 3.4 million acres of CRP in North Dakota back in 16, 17. I think that cost about $120 million a year just for that cover. That doesn't include parks or any of the other ideas. So this is, I mean, it's a great start. It's wonderful to have a governor that's this enthused about outdoor recreation and hunting. I mean, Kelly Armstrong is a hunter. It's important. He takes time off from being governor to go hunting, which is awesome. So it's a start, but it's a small number compared to the number that we all know it takes to do big landscape level conservation. So Laura wanted lessons learned, so I'll give you a few lessons learned. I know you're polling, and I would say use polling. You have to do that, but I'd be cautious and skeptical. I mean, most polling right now is kind of without other messages. And like I said, ours was 80-20 in support. Ended up 20-40 in opposition after the messaging took over. And the messaging was pretty intense. It was pretty extensive. If I were to do it over, I'd spend a lot more time engaging with stakeholders. I think we didn't do enough work talking through this early on with lots of folks that were affected, kind of understanding, and it kind of goes with the next one, understanding the potential opposition. I mean, what are some of these groups thinking? The oil industry, like I said, this didn't change their taxes at all. They still pay a 5% gross production tax. So even today, if someone said, why were they so opposed using some additional amount of their money for the ballot measures, I couldn't answer that question. It's a real great PR move to be part of creating habitat, managing grassland, protecting things. I'm not sure. Facts are optional. I referenced the push polling. Maybe that's being a little skeptical, but it's, when you get into these kind of public policy issues, whether it's a ballot measure or whether it's a statutory thing in your legislature, if you've got strong opposition, any of you that work in public policy, you know that sometimes what's said about your measure or your statute isn't actually what you're trying to do. And once that information gets out there that's erroneous or misleading, it's hard to pull it back. You can't pull it back. And the last one, again, maybe that's being a little too rough on our sportsmen, but we put so much faith in the fact that our hunters and anglers and outdoor recreation users would support something that would enhance their outdoor opportunities that we probably overlooked. Maybe we didn't message well enough. It's again kind of a mystery, but people tend to be very focused on short-term things. And I had people say, well, I can't support your measure. I'll lose my deer hunting spot. Well, okay. That same person now probably hasn't had a deer license for 5 years because their deer herd's down to a third of what it used to be. So you probably know all that, but it's really hard to get people to think big picture, long-term, back up and look at what this is going to mean to them 8-10 years down the road, or what it's going to mean to their kids or grandkids. So, and I guess those of us who worked on this probably need to take the blame for that. We probably didn't do nearly a good enough job messaging what the vision was, what it really meant, but we were, I'll say I'll speak for myself. I was very disappointed. Our sportsmen abandoned us on our really big picture issue. But we do have an outdoor heritage fund. We do have millions of dollars that help with habitat, parks and recreation. There is an effort underway right now. We're going to be putting a full court press on. Mark and I were just talking about it over lunch, to let the statutory formula of 20 and 40 work. And the governor has indicated support for that, as have some folks in the energy industry. Again, it's a long ways till the session, so we'll see if that sticks. But that would give us more money. But again, we need, as I'm sure you would hear, we need 100 to 150 million a year to actually make a real landscape difference. That's a hard number to come up with, and it's a hard vision for people to really grasp. So with that, I'll stop. Assume you want to take questions when we're done. Okay.
Thank you, Keith. Appreciate your insight and experience, sharing that with us. Next speaker, Mark Johnson, hails from Chisago City, Minnesota. Mark is recently retired for 35 years working in the conservation field. He holds a master's degree in management. He served the last 11 years of his career as executive director of the Lessard Sands Outdoor Heritage Council, a Minnesota legislative council that makes annual conservation funding recommendations to the legislature and monitors outdoor heritage habitat project spending in Minnesota. So please help me welcome Mark Johnson to the podium.
There we go. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here to speak with you. I was asked to talk about dedicated funding in Minnesota and give you an overview of what we've done over there. I am so excited for you. And ever since I took that job, actually, since 2008, when our constitutional amendment passed in Minnesota by Clean Water, Land, and Legacy funding, I've wondered when are other states going to be doing this also. And I thought they'd tumble in. It hasn't happened. And I'm shocked. And after being involved in this now intimately for 11 years on where the money goes and what it does, I'm that much more excited when I see a group like this that's got some energy and wants to make things happen. So hopefully this will give you some information. I'm going to kind of switch back and forth between these so you guys don't get forgotten over on this side. The Clean Water, Land, and Legacy isn't the only thing in Minnesota's dedicated funding. There are actually two sources for dedicated funding in Minnesota. And the first one is the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. And then the second is the Outdoor Heritage Fund, which is through the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Constitutional Amendment. So both of these started as constitutional amendments. The Environmental Trust Fund is just that. It's a trust fund. And it comes from the lottery proceeds in Minnesota. The trust fund actually, it started in 1988. And it wasn't until 1990 that they actually said we're going to take 40% of the legacy or of the lottery proceeds and put it into the Environmental Trust Fund. And then that as you can see, in 1998, it was reaffirmed until 2025. So it expired in 2025, but in 2024, they put it on the ballot again. And the citizens overwhelmingly approved it and actually increased the amount of money that's going to go to it and how it's going to be used. So that's going to go now till 2050. And you can see the ballot, how heavily it went. But these funds are to be used for protection, conservation, preservation, and enhancement of the state's air, water, land, fish, wildlife, and other resources. So a very broad spectrum use with regards to natural resources and the environment. And the funds are to be used to supplement, not to supplant for funding. So that's some important things to happen. Interesting, it's a trust fund. So only 5.5% of the funds are used annually. And the rest of it goes into the corpus. This year, that's going to be about $121 million that's going to be appropriated from the legislature for projects in those areas for the environment. And the other one, the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment is where the Outdoor Heritage Fund is nested. And that actually was ratified in 2008 by the voters in Minnesota. It's a constitutional amendment. I can't stress that enough. And we did that purposefully because the legislature can't mess with it. It's what the people say is going to happen. And we've got the wording in there to make sure the funds are going to be used as they're supposed to. But 25-year life in 2034 expires probably in 2032 or whatever the closest general election with the presidential campaign is going to, with presidential election is going to be when it's renewed, or they're going to try to renew it. It was in 2008, we had a recession. Remember that? Many of you don't, but we did. And it wasn't an easy recession. But the Minnesota voters voted a new tax upon themselves of 0.3% sales tax. So every dollar you spent on something, 3.8 cents went into these accounts. It wasn't small, but you're thinking, okay, it's only 4 cents on a dollar. That's kind of the way it was marketed too. but it adds up so quickly. So with it also in the constitutional language and in statute, we talk about different accounts. So there are 4 dedicated funding accounts. One is for clean water, and that's, plain what it's used for. The other was for outdoor heritage, which is the habitat portion, which is what I was involved with now for 11 years. And then parks and trails and arts and cultural heritage. And if you look at the amounts up there, a third of the money actually goes to clean water, a third to outdoor heritage or habitat. And then the other third was split up between parks and trails and arts and cultural heritage. So just the outdoor heritage portion is about $150 million a year. So you have that much more going again to clean water and to arts and parks. So that. The outdoor heritage portion, in statute and in the constitutional amendment, it says that it has to be used, the money can only be used to protect, restore, and enhance wetlands, prairies, forests, and habitat for fish, game, and wildlife. So very restricted use. There's a lot of things you can do with that, but it's got to be for that. It can't be for a dog park in Minneapolis. And believe me, legislators have tried to do that. Phyllis Kahn is one. And I had arguments with Phyllis when I was in my job with this about, Phyllis, that's just not the deal. She actually got it passed in the final legislation through the House, through the Senate. She put it on in the conference committee. It passed both floors, went to the governor, and thankfully, our governor at the time, who was Mark Dayton, line item veto of that, because it wasn't constitutionally fit for the use of the money. In the outdoor heritage funds, the origins of this goes back to really 1998. And that's with the passage of the Minnesota Right to Hunt and Fish Amendment. That's when it sounds kind of odd, but the hook and bullet groups and really got together in conservation groups. I just say hook and bullet, I'm sorry, but that's kind of an analogy, something we use over there. They got together and they said, we really want to codify in our Constitution. This is part of our heritage. So that's why that constitutional amendment was passed. And then right after that, they all said, okay, now we've got it codified. Now, how can we ensure that our great grandchildren can go out and do these activities in great resources? So that's why there was a funding effort that was brought about for dedicated funding. And originally it was 3/16 of 1% in existing sales tax is what we used. And then they said, what about an 1/8 and then a 16th? And there were many different renditions, but that none of them passed the legislature. They all failed the legislature. So they didn't go to the constitutional amendment. And then in 2008, we finally got a bill, which was 3/8 of 1% in new sales tax, something a lot of legislators thought, that's not going to pass. So they put it on the ballot and it passed. In fact, it passed by about, I think, 57% of the voters. In Minnesota, if you vote for a constitutional amendment, or if you vote and there's a constitutional amendment on the ballot, and you don't vote for or against it, just leave it blank, it counts as a no. And there was about 6% of the voters that didn't vote. So those were automatic no's. So we really had to make sure that we had a good turnout. And part of the turnout was due to the champions all around. Our biggest champion, really, these are a few of them. Bob Lassard, Senator Bob Lassard. He was passionate. He's from International Falls. He's a Democrat. Democrats were always trying to get him out of office because they didn't like him. At least the party didn't, but the locals, his people did, because he represented his constituents. And Bob was a hunter and fisherman. They called him the old trapper. Bud Grant was a good friend of Bob's. He was the coach of the Vikings. Bud got involved in this. Ron Shira, Joe Dugans with Pheasants Friends, and many, many, many others. The interesting thing was there was a large collaborative, because when clean water, parks and trails, and arts and cultural heritage were brought together, it created a critical mass to get things to pass. We can talk about this later, but that wasn't without its own strife internally. I had problems with that collaborative when I was in there. And I look back and I think, boy, was I short-sighted, because we needed, and I don't think it would have passed overall without that collaborative. I'm not going to go into this a lot, but an important thing with this is that in statute, there is guidance for the Outdoor Heritage Council, which I served for, ran the staff for 11 years. It's part of the legislative branch, but they make recommendations to the legislature on how the funds from the Outdoor Heritage Fund are going to be should be appropriated each year. And that was my job, was to take the recommendations of the council in about December, put them in a bill form, and then walk them through the legislative process through the year to get them passed. Go to all the committees, everything else. There was also a small grants portion that was put into law, saying that we want to make sure that all these small groups get a chance to get a bite of the apple too, not just big groups, not agencies, but small groups. So in those recommendations, every year, there's about $10 million to $15 million that are recommended for this CPL, or Conservation Partner Legacy Program. The DNR runs that, the DNR vets the proposals for that. And those proposals are from $5,000 to $500,000. The council itself vets the larger projects, which are $500,000 on and up, and can be several millions. Just some other things, the money's got to be used on permanently protected land. Can't be used on private land that doesn't have any conservation easement on. And conservation easements have to be permanent, not temporary, which, some of them are 15 years or whatever it might be. These have to be permanent. It can be used for fee title acquisition of property. But on every property that's acquired with these funds, whether it's in fee or an easement, there's a notice of funding restriction that's applied to the deed. And that says that if it's an easement, you can have to continue using it in the way it's intended within the easement. If there's to deviate from that, then it has to have approval by the council. If it's land that's acquired in fee, it can be sold. It has to be used in accordance with the original prescriptions of the accomplishment plan with which monies were appropriated. And then to change that, they have to come before the council, and then there's also, the council notifies the legislature, so everybody's got to be happy with what's happening. I should mention one other thing, and this is really important from an inside standpoint, is that every year, those that are holding properties have to attest to that property being used the way it's supposed to, the way it's intended. From an oversight, yeah, there we go. Yeah, I'm sorry, I was trying to be cute and put some motion in here. The oversight, there's a few different deals of it, but first of all, is a 12-member council. This put in law, I mentioned a little earlier. The governor appoints 4 citizen members, the House and the Senate each appoint 2 citizen members, and then the House and the Senate each also appoint 1 legislator from the majority party and 1 from the minority. So there are 12 members, 8 of them are citizens, and that is extremely important because it gives a citizen majority to the council in all of its discussions and its recommendations. The staff for the Outdoor Heritage, it's just small. We have 4 people on staff. They're putting on one more now that I left, a 5th person, an analyst. But we could do a lot with a little staff because we have a very good interactive program. And so all the program managers do their semi-annual reports and their annual reports and everything else through that. Regular updates to the council from the staff on what's going on. So we have a lot of transparency and accountability going on here. The other thing was the grants management. In other words, keeping an eye on the payments and what's being spent was contracted out to the DNR. And because this whole thing is set on a reimbursement-based format, the work has to be done first. And then the expense reports are brought in, reviewed, making sure everything was done right. The work was done right. It's eligible expenses, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's reimbursement. So that, I think, was a very crucial thing. You'll hear me talk about that later. The annual field evaluations, in law, it says that there has to be at least 1/10 of the proceeds have to be used to evaluate the restorations and enhancements on an annual basis. So when that happens, there's that's the DNR, the Board of Soil and Water, and the universities and the specialists, the biology specialists in the fields of what's being done, going out and examining not all, but a portion of the restorations and enhancements that have been done. And then that's reported back to the legislature annually and the council annually. So there's a lot of transparency going on. And then, and that's all field stuff, or field audits and evaluations. And finally, there's the Office of the Legislative Auditor. Of course, they do all kinds of stuff, but they do review individual projects, individual programs, appropriations, recipients, And they even, actually, before I left, about 6 months, my last 6 months, about 5 of that was the Office of the Legislative Auditor doing an audit of our books, as well as the DNR grants management, to make sure that all of the management was being done correctly in the monitoring. And it passed really nicely. Yeah, it's wonderful. I like audits. I'm sorry, I'm a weirdo, but if you get an audit and it goes good, it's all green. Give you an idea of what's happened in the first 16 years, we about just over $2 billion were allocated from the legislature for habitat work in Minnesota, just to the Outdoor Heritage Fund. That's how much money ends up coming in from this little 3/8 of 1%. Actually, 1/3 of that 3/8 of 1%. 650 million in leveraged funds already from federal, local, and private donations. And in the small grants portion, they put up over $100 million in allocations there, with about 16 million in match. And in the first 16 years, 1.3 million acres have been restored, protected, or enhanced in Minnesota. All of the acres that have been acquired in fee have also been restored to a specific level of biodiversity before they're handed over to the DNR or whoever it might be that's holding those properties. And then you can see CPL had a major effect in this too. There we go. Who gets the monies in Minnesota? You've got to apply. So even our agencies, even the DNR and the Board of Water and Soil Resources, have to apply for funds. And then if other local units of governments are eligible, that's all in law too, that those people should all be eligible. Tribal units, counties, cities, SWCDs, watershed districts, the whole shebang. Nonprofits, this is just a small list. And it's just examples of who's received monies in the past. So it's a put in your application, if it's a good biologically sound project that's going to help habitat, that's going to increase habitat for fish, game, and wildlife, wonderful. Then it's you probably are going to get at least a hearing, and you may very well get funding. You may not get all of your funding. You may only get a portion, a third of it, or less. But you stand a really good chance. This is an example of one of the projects that's just over the border in Lac-Parle, Swift, and Big Stone counties, and it's the Marsh Lake Ecosystem Restoration Project. Marsh Lake is about a 5,000 acre water. 5,000 acres of water, and of course you have the land next to that. And it's part of Lac-Parle Wildlife Management Unit, for those of you who know that. It was a collaboration with the federal government, with Outdoor Heritage Funds. Pheasants Forever and Ducks Unlimited were both involved in it. Nature Conservancy may have been as well. And but the feds kicked in about 8.6 million, and the Outdoor Heritage made about 4.6 million. There was a water control structure. There was Pondicherry River kicks in right where that water control structure was. So there was some rerouting of that. It's a fish passage put in. Previously, it was just a stop. It was just a dam, and the fish couldn't get up or downstream. So it was dead. The sturgeon couldn't go upstream. The walleyes couldn't do it. Nothing else. What they did, I should say, was they put in a fish structure. This is actually a dam, but it's a rock weir system, which allows fish to still pass through, and it works great. When there's water moving, there's fish moving. In the spring, you see walleye and sturgeon, northerns and bass and everything, or suckers, whatever it might be, going upstream. It's just incredible the amount of fish that move through there. And the first season that they had that in, there were fish moving through. Finally, going back to spawn upstream. The water control structure, you can see it here, it's a great big thing, but they put that in so they can manage this whole wetland, this marsh lake. And the first drawdown, it was so cool because they drew it down. So it was just this mud flat. Even 5,000 acres of instead of being water, it's just mud, except for a little channel going through it from the creek. And then they kept it dry, I think, for the better part of 2 years or 2 summers at least. So the soils could dry out, that mud could compact. And the native plants came back beautifully, incredibly. When the water came up, the ducks were back. I talked to an older guy who's a DU member, and he was 82 years older than he was. And he said he went out there that fall after they brought the water back in. And he said, it was like I was 14 again. Said the ducks were here like when I was 14. And I can relate. I'm not that old, but I can relate. Here's another example. This is Swan Lake. It's in Nicollet County. Again, a 10,000 acre wetland that was enhanced. And a big portion of that was this water control unit that was put in. It was put in for water control. It's a stop log system, if you're familiar with those, so they can take out the logs or take out the steps and lower the water. But the other part of it was that it was also a fish barrier because carp were coming up into that watershed, murking up the water, stirring everything up, and they had to help take care of that. So very important steps. We get a lot of grassland restoration in a lot of places in Minnesota. There are fields and land that were put under the plow that never showed up. Wetlands drain, whatever, those are turned into incredible prairie. There's a lot of native prairie in Minnesota still, but there's a lot of acres that have been reacquired to protect in perpetuity that are still native prairie. And I've been on several of them, and they are, it's just breathtaking, especially when they're managed, when they're enhanced afterwards with prescribed thing. We have, through these funds, we are fortunate that the DNR actually came to the council and said, we'd like to do roving crews. So they have 5 roving crews across Minnesota. And those crews go out on outdoor heritage projects. So it's permanently protected lands that are open to the public. They go out there and they do extra enhancement. It's prescribed fire is their specialty. They'll do, overseeding or winter seeding of prairies and grasslands. They also, this picture up here is kind of interesting. There's a bunch of people standing and there's a pile of stuff here, and that's all seed, native seed that they have harvested off outdoor heritage projects, grass and forbs. I have no idea what the value of that seed is, but you know how expensive it is for native seed. And then that's local ecotype seed. So it's not like taking seed from southern Nebraska and trying to plant it in northern South Dakota, so it's going to have a risk of not surviving. This is local ecotype seed, so it's even more valuable. In southeastern Minnesota, you've always got to be thinking about water, and it's for habitat for fish, game, and wildlife. In southeastern Minnesota, we have a lot of trout streams, and a lot of the trout streams looked, and some of them still do, look like this. They haven't got to yet. Where you get sloping banks, and it's high water input and heavy rains coming all at once to wash things out. This is that same spot after. The banks are all emboldened, the trout are back. I've been to this spot, there have been many heavy rainfalls in that area in years since this was done. And it hasn't broken in, it hasn't busted out again. It's just some really incredible work. In fact, some of the cutting edge work be it for prairie restoration, be it for trout stream restoration, all of that stuff, because there's so much of it going on in Minnesota, some of the new cutting edge work and the stuff we're finding out is coming from Minnesota, just because we, I hit something, but just because we've got so much work going on, they're learning a lot. Thank you, sorry about that. And lessons learned, real quick, I just tried to throw it on a few of them, but that citizen-led committee that I talked about, that's one of the greatest things that you could ever do if you have dedicated funding, because it adds to the integrity and the credibility with the citizens about what's being recommended for the money, where the money is going. Reimbursement-based program, reimbursement-based program. I think that's necessary. And in Minnesota, we aren't short of fraud. You want some fraud? Come on over to Minnesota. But we have been able to keep that down. The strong guidance in law, whatever you do, make sure you got it just right in law, because they'll find the loopholes. And then, you're going to have a choice whether, if you want to do dedicated funding, at least a couple of the choices is one, put it into a trust fund and take part of the monies each year to spend. So you let the corpus grow and you use part of those maybe part of the annual funds, but mostly part of the interest that's borne on that account. Or you can do it the other way, like the Outdoor Heritage Fund, the Clean Water Fund and stuff, where you just spend it all each year, or try to spend it each year. And by spending it each year, it's allocated each year. The projects themselves, like for outdoor heritage, last from 4 to probably 9 years to get them accomplished because they're just so detailed. When you get into grassland restoration, management, and removing dams, replacing with rock weeder systems, whatever it may be. Lastly, I think that the most important thing I can tell you all is you've got to have citizens involved. Citizens have to own it. They have to own the process, and they have to own the oversight. And I think I've seen there's more citizen involvement with the Outdoor Heritage Fund in Minnesota than there is with the Clean Water Fund or the Arts and Parks or the Parks and Trails or the Arts and Cultural Heritage. And because of that, when we go to the legislature with our recommendations, they generally sail through. We'll get some flack here and there, a lot of questions, but it generally goes through as the council recommended because it's so well vetted compared to the others. So citizen involvement, I guess you can't mention that enough. Very last is the last slide, and that is that on our website, you can see the website up there, lsohc.mn.gov. But if you go on there, you'll see this map. If you click on the map, each of those dots are completed projects across Minnesota. But each of those dots represents dozens of projects, at least. So you can burrow down, you just hit your plus so you can improve the size. And as you burrow down in, you go to each individual project and see who did it, what they did, how much it cost, why they did it, what were the outcomes of it, who was already involved in it, and what were the end results. And the reason for that, and that's all on our interactive website programs. The reason for that is so the citizens know where their money went and what it's doing. The problem is now telling people and getting it in the message so people actually will look and realize and listen. I'll give you one last thing, and I'll hand the clicker back, is that we had in southeast of the metro area, there's the Vermilion Trout Stream, and there was a tour of that by our council a couple of years ago. And the tour was there because the trout stream had been really, really tough shape. It's in a metro area. There's still some farmland there, but farmers were farming right up to the trout stream. So with the Outdoor Heritage Funds, they bought buffer strips to keep so the farming could stay back, and the landowners were happy with that. They emboldened the banks, they put in beautiful structure, they put the re-meander back into the stream. And there was an older gentleman in his 80s there, he was in his mid-80s. He said, I fished this with my grandpa when I was about 10 years old. And, you know, what a legacy. And he said, but for the last 20 years, there were no fish here. Now the fish were back because the habitat was back. And he said, now I'm bringing my grandson here. He had his grandson there who was about 10 or 11 years old, and they were doing fishing. It's all about stories, folks. You heard it the last few days. It's all about getting the money dedicated and making sure that citizens understand that it's going to be for everyone and future generations. So I'm retired now. If there's ever any way I can help, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, I'm going to enjoy my retirement. Thank you.
With that, let me introduce Brian Garrels. Brian is a volunteer regional director, regional flyway VP, excuse me, for Duckton Limited, lives in Emmitsburg, Iowa. And he is going to provide us with an overview of Iowa's Natural Heritage Recreational Resource and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. So, Brian, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Emmett. Yeah, I'm gonna turn this one.
Yep.
Yeah, that was it. So. All right, I'll use this one. Yeah, thank you for being here. You wanted why would a Ducks Unlimited guy be here at Grasslands thing? You think ducks need water, right? Well, ducks also need grassland. They need about 10 acres of upland, grassland, and habitat for every acre of water to raise a successful brood. So that's why this area, especially for Ducks Unlimited, the Prairie Pothole region, which extends from northern Iowa, where I'm at, clear up into Minnesota, the Dakotas, clear up into Manitoba and Alberta. That's a duck factory, and that raises about 40% of this continent's ducks. And so when you talk about grasslands, I was very excited to get here and to hear what you are working on here. I think it's so very important. As I get up here and listen to the other speakers, Iowa's attempt to put together a fund is so much like the rest of them. The background is the same. So you've heard a lot about it. So I'll try to follow the steps that I've heard a good presenter once tell me. There's three steps, 3 B's you have to follow to make a good presentation. Be brief, be brilliant, and be going. So I'll try to do that. As you see on the screen, the efforts to create a dedicated conservation funding for the state of Iowa started back in 2006, actually, when a bipartisan coalition of legislators, stakeholders, and NGOs like Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, and Whitetails, the whole group got together to try to come together with a funding circumstance to protect the natural resources in the state. The work laid out groundwork for a constitutional amendment, heard that before today, that would ensure some stable long-term investment in water quality, wildlife habitat, and parks and recreation. And the group settled on a sales tax related funding to guarantee an appropriate method to gather these funds and support the state's natural resources. So back on November in 2010, 63% of the Iowa voters approved what was to become known Amendment 1, adding the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust to the Iowa Constitution. The amendment did not itself raise taxes, but instead stipulated that the fund would be filled with the first 3/8 of a cent increase of the next sales tax increase. We looked across the border to the north and looked what Minnesota was doing with 3/8 cent of taxes. And we said, that sounds pretty good. So follow that voter approval. The Senate filed amendment took effect in 2011, established the statutory framework for how the trust fund would operate. How was it funded? Okay, so now, although the constitutional amendment created the trust fund, it has never been funded because the sales tax has never been increased. Okay, so the trust fund sits empty because it requires that sales tax increase of 3/8 of a cent for funding. As a result, the fund exists in the structure, but not in practice. So annual reports still need to be made and everything else, but the annual reports I just read, the one for 2024, and it outlines on 26 pages all the lost opportunities that we've had over the last year. And so it's been 16 years, going on 16 years now. The fund was established and it had 7 funding vehicles that it was going to support. It's going to take 7% for lake restoration, 10% for trails, 13% for research enhancement and protection program. Okay, that is already in place. That's kind of a mini fund that's already been in place, but this new amendment for the Constitution was going to totally enhance that. 13% was going to go to the local county conservation groups, 14% strictly for watershed protection, 20% was going to go to soil conservation and water practices and protection through the Iowa, administered by the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, IDOLS, we'll call it IDOLS. And then another 23% to the DNR. So what has happened since? All right. Well, we've been working on this now for going on 16 years. We've had it in the legislature. In fact, we had another survey done, a poll. We talked about polls here today. Where nearly 70% of the Iowa voters approved this sales tax increase. And the frustrating part of it is Iowa has a 6% sales tax plus a 1% local option sales tax. Okay, and that the county gets the 1%. 97 of the 99 counties in the state of Iowa participate in the local option sales tax. All the legislation would have to do is rescind that local option, add another percent to the actual sales tax for 7% sales tax, and we'd be there. We'd have it. The net effect to the citizens of Iowa would be zero as far as their sales tax payments, because we wouldn't really influence that at all. But by raising that 1% up to 7% and reducing the local option sales tax portion of it, we would get our 3/8% of that increase. Well, that's what we tried for 16 years. And just like we talked about relationships, we've had capital days, we've had people calling and talking to their legislators, but we just can't quite get it over the top. So what's the challenge now is that the fact that in the last 15 years, we've become somewhat fatigued on this point. It's there, it's still there. Constitutional amendment is still there, but now we've had a change in my organization. We've had a change in legislators. And so we have to re-educate everybody. We have to bring the momentum back that we had in 2010, 2012, just about had it through with the former governor, Governor Terry Branstad. And now his lieutenant governor, Governor Reynolds, just about had her convinced. And now what? She's not running for the re-election. So now we're going to have a new governor and we get to start all over again. And again, there's going to be changeover in the House and the Senate. So our challenge is that we have to re-educate not only the legislators, but we have to bring the citizens up to make sure that they have the incentive to go out and make those contacts to help us. What would this thing raise? We've lost $180 million a year. So take that times 15, we're talking just short of $3 billion in enhancements and improvements that we could have done. When we first got this thing started back in 2010 or 2006 and built it, we had a great partnership and coalition of a diverse group. We had the ag communities, we had the legislators, we had the conservation groups. We've since lost the support of the ag community right now. And in fact, there's one of our biggest upholders. In fact, they've introduced a bill this year to repeal the constitutional battle, the amendment, repeal it and replace it with some type of property tax relief. That's the big word now, property tax relief. Everybody hears about that. So that's what their impetus is right now, not a conservation or natural resource enhancement. So we're fighting that. In fact, I think that same situation is occurring in North Dakota. I believe there was a North Dakota congressman in Washington start a proposed legislation that would cause for buybacks of the permanent easement program, with the WRP and those kinds of things at the national level, allow for buybacks, and then also allow for restriction on length of time, restricted to no more than 30 years. Well, coming from that part of the country, I can't understand why that would happen. But again, I think this agriculture influence, we need to have more corn ground. Well, So corn is so cheap, so we need to make more, right? Doesn't make any sense to me, but so far that legislation has been suppressed as well on the national level and at state level in Iowa. So those are a couple of things, but have we been sitting on our hands? No, not really. For one, Ducks Unlimited has made an agreement with IDOLS, the Iowa Department of Ag and Stewardship, to maybe do some of the projects that would have been happening if this fund would be in place. So right now, we've got 121 IDOLS projects. There's been 7 acquisitions just in this last year and 36 public land projects that Ducks Unlimited has actually taken from the DU budget to enhance some of these Iowa projects. In 2025, we've completed 3 public lands totaling a little over 500 acres and some wetland projects to the tune of 160 acres. So even though this fund is not there, we're bringing in monies from other organizations to do some of the work that would be done with this enhancement. So that's a real brief situation. The thing that Iowa has tried to do is get this fund started. It's there, it's in place. We just need to get the legislature to give us a sales tax increase. And it probably won't be a 3/8, it'll probably be 1% when it does happen. But if they could just flip that local option out of there and increase it by 1%, we'd be golden. So that's a quick overview of Iowa and kind of where we're at. We're jealous of everybody else that has.
All right, Randy, we're gonna come back with the panel now. Thanks.
Here I am.
All right, so Keith, Mark, you want to go sit in the chairs up front for questions?
We'll invite the panel up. We'll invite the panel up again and take a few questions. You've got maybe 6-8 minutes for
Yep.
questions, Laura. So appreciate the panelists coming
Hey,
back up, right?
What?
I'm gonna hand you guys a
Run the mic
microphone
back and
and
forth. Oh, yes, I am so sorry. Oh, but we've got questions coming in.
All right, so who has the first question? Thank you. And if you need to stretch right now, you have the excuse of standing up and moving towards the center if you need to stretch that way.
So if South Dakota wanted to do this, what would you recommend being the first step? What do we need to do to start getting a better funding of our conservation?
just. Yeah, sure.
My response will be very short. It goes back to building your stakeholder coalitions. You gotta get your ag and your whatever major states, our state is energy, you gotta get those folks kind of all head in the same direction. Otherwise, a really big idea isn't gonna work. That's been my experience.
The batteries yesterday.
I pretty much echo that. The figure out what size your tent is gonna be. In other words, who you want, and how many people you want underneath your tent. I mentioned that I had some problems when we started with back before 2008. Yeah, I was with the Hook and Bullet, so I was working for the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association. I was the director at the time. And I thought, okay, this is all about natural, it's all about fish and game. And when arts and cultural heritage wanted to come in, boy, I thought, that's way off in left field. What are we doing? But they brought in a constituency that helped. Clean water really helped. They brought in a constituency that was incredible, and we all want clean water. So rather than think about what your differences are, think about what your commonalities are. You can't be fighting underneath the tent. You all have to carry a banner together.
Randy, did you want to comment?
I'll just mention.
Repeat the question for me, would you? Had a hard time hearing it.
What advice do you have for South Dakota to get started?
Well, get it, if you can do that, get it in the Constitution. And because there will be attempts to steal the money. Of course, you have to have a source of money. I think I did look at your process, and it's pretty general in terms of what the money can be used for. I think the first thing is keep specific the types of projects, and that make sure that money goes to those and make sure it's constitutionally protected. Because otherwise, the legislators run into fiscal trouble, and they'll take the money and use it to balance the budget. I don't know if you have a constitutional requirement to have a balanced budget, but we do in Nebraska. And we're almost $1 billion in the hole right now, and we've got less than half the legislative session to go. So I don't know. They've been scooping up in Nebraska all the cash funds, different cash funds from veterans, cultural stuff. Obviously, the environmental trust fund. I think they've taken, the appropriations committee wants to take 11 million from that. And we have projects that are multi-year, and the project recipients now are getting a letter from the trust fund saying, don't count on money for your second or third year if you have a multi-year project. And of course, that has making people pull their hair out about that.
One other thing you might want to consider is make sure, if you can, try to find out why your detractors are your opponents. Like I said, we've lost our ag support because somewhere they think that through these funds, $180 million a year is what they're anticipated, that we're going to be buying up farmland and preventing young farmers from getting into the business. Well, I'm from Northwest Iowa, and if you're familiar with the kind of land prices there, this fund was not meant to be paying $16,000 to $18,000 an acre. All right, or if, number one, this fund will not take land, it will only purchase land that's offered. All right, and one of the other bills that was presented is to prevent, this is one in Iowa, prevent farmers from selling land to the state. Now, because they think farmers are clamoring to sell this cheap land to the DNR. And, you know, we're only this fund would only finance land purchases that are offered that would fit the DNR or the states, be it for trails or for habitat or whatever it may be. So find out what your detractors, why they're detractors, and either, if you can't convince them, at least have a reasonable answer to counter them.
I'm just gonna add one more thing. I want to apologize because what you're getting from us is sound bites in a way. There's so many nuances to this thing. It really takes a group to sit down and talk about it in depth, and then bring in other people, other consultants, free consultants, people who have had experiences in different states, to say what they think the weak points and strong points are, and help guide you, not to change your mind, but to help you figure out what is it you need, what is it you want, and what will fit with South Dakota, because you're going to be different than everybody else. And that's okay. That's a good thing.
I have a few questions here, I guess. One, Keith, you obviously showed that you still have a lot of demand for money to do work there. For Mark, in Minnesota, you seem to have a lot of money coming in annually. Is the demand still there, or is demand waning, I guess, over the years that we've had? And then a follow-up to that is, for everybody, how did you guys best demonstrate the demand for the fund to begin with?
The demand for private voluntary conservation in North Dakota is through the roof. I mean, the phone, I think I can speak for all of our partners. The phone never quits ringing. We could spend $100 million a year if we could deliver it. I'm not sure we actually estimated what the demand would be. You just kind of know what's there, and things are so expensive now. So, speaking for us, we didn't really have a good estimate of what it would be, but it's encouraging to see how much demand, and it has not waned.
In Minnesota, a lot of the low hanging fruit is already gone. In other words, the easy projects are done. And that's not totally true, but generally true. The lower priced land that's for fee acquisition is done. There's still a move to buy more conservation easements, but the price of that, just like the price of fee title land, is going up. And personally, I don't mind conservation easements, but sometimes they aren't the wisest thing. So I think there will be some review of that in the future. Restoration and enhancements of public lands, yeah, there's still lots of room to go. The opportunities of getting working lands within those conservation easements, working livestock lands, grazing lands, I think is still big. And I hope that would also improve our livestock industry in Minnesota. There has been some of that done. There was in the forest region of Minnesota, easements are pretty much, and acquisitions are pretty much meeting their end. There was a large easement with the land and paper company up in Grand Rapids a number of years ago. It's 188,000 acres of working forest, corporate working forest. And the easement said that it's got to remain in perpetuity in working forest, and it has to be under one ownership, so it can't be fragmented. And it's got to be open to the public use in perpetuity. That's continuous. 188,000 acres is pretty nice for people to be able to go and hunt and fish and pick berries and hike and run and everything. But with those cherries, they're pretty much been picked. So you got to be smarter, and the groups are smarter about how they're picking it up. Other than that, I think in the beginning, we didn't have money figured what it's going to take. We just
Give me the question again.
What was the question again? We have. What was the demand for dollars in terms of the projects themselves over time in Nebraska?
Well, a lot of demand. We've had more demand than we have money. But what's happened is that the board, and it's at the direction of the governor and his administration, has not given out awards. So what's happened is that there's been an accumulation of money in the trust, and that's very attractive to the legislators. So they've jumped on it. I think there's something like $70 million in there. And of course, that's very tempting for the legislators to grab it. We haven't had no real dearth of project requests up until lately, because many had just been turned down for various reasons that the applicants haven't been able to figure out. Well, as far as we know, the idea was to gather the money so it could be used as a reserve fund, help balance the budget. And of course, that's exactly what's happened. So again, you got to protect it. We've had a very, as I said before, we had really for a lot of years very good boards who were independent. They were all appointed by the governors, but very independent and focused on conservation and conservation projects. But lately, that's changed, and it's been sad. The fact there was a lawsuit that the Friends of the Environmental Trust did not file, but two individuals filed to get the internal workings of the board transparent, because there were requests denied, and we didn't know why. And I, of course, we weren't applying for any. Friends did. We didn't apply for any, but those that did didn't know why. So there was a lawsuit filed and was settled. They redid how things were done in terms of considering projects and made a lot more transparent. They weren't following their own rules. So we've had that kind of issue lately, and those issues were not there at the beginning. The trust for many years worked really well, except for the time back in 2003 when they were going to help balance the budget, and we sort of negotiated out of that and got that constitutionally protected. Now it's happening again, so it's a constant watch. And we've had this coalition that's working now for this constitutional amendment to protect it is wide ranging, includes ranchers, farmers, conservation or organizations. And it's really in my, and I haven't observed it the whole time, but my observation been very effective because I've been able to put together a large group of varied interests, bipartisan interest to protect the trust, because it's very popular. It's been very popular with the people, very popular with ranchers, farmers, and there just isn't there isn't opposition to what they're doing, and so anyway, it's been a problem, but we keep working at it, and I feel for those who have been unable to get any funding at all.
Thank you very much, Randy.
And one other thing that you have to watch for is land use priority. There's, like I said, nobody's gonna be out buying $16,000, $18,000 crop ground to put in a wetland. The city of Des Moines, a few years back, sued about 3 counties up in northwest Iowa at the upper end of the Raccoon River watershed. Raccoon River goes down to Des Moines, and that's their water source. They were having to spend a lot of money to clean that water up, take the nitrates out of it. And so they actually went back upstream and sued the point source, what they thought was the point source for that nitrate levels in the water. As a result, now IDOLS, and with partnership with some of these other groups that would have been funded with our trust fund, are doing some work with conservation, buffer strips, more buffer strips, biofilters, those type of things to try to mitigate that, because Iowa does have a nutrient reduction strategy trying to reduce that the amount of nitrates that do go down to the Mississippi and all down to the Delta. So they're working on that, trying to eliminate that, so that, like I said, some of the land has to be used for those kind of projects. So yeah, there's definitely a call for these funds to be used in that way.
I think we're running to the end of our time, and want to really thank all of our speakers today, and appreciate you gentlemen sharing your expertise, your experience, your insights. That'll be very valuable to us as we move forward and trying to craft an approach here in South Dakota. So thank you very much, and please